Hello, MD Nation, and welcome to the MD's Fantasy Football Show. But before we begin today's show, I just want to talk to you guys about a sponsor that we have that are going to be presenting the show for you guys today, and their name is called Podgo. And Podgo is the easiest way for you to monetize your podcast, providing podcasters with a flat rate for ad space, so you always know how much you get when you include an ad from Podgo. I recently joined as a member, and you can too. Apply today to become a member and immediately be connected with advertisers that fit your audience. Be sure to reference this show when you sign up. That's podgo.co at podgo.co and check out Podgo today.
Welcome to Belly Up Sports, MD's Fantasy Football Show. Now for your host, Dan Mater.
And everybody, welcome back to the show. We got a great one in store for you today. It is Friday, so of course it's always a good day for everybody, but of course we're going to be talking about quite a few things in today's show. We're still continuing the team profile series. We don't have any guests today. The reason we don't have any guests today is because I've been previewing the rankings for the past couple of weeks for a couple of teams. And I'm getting you ready for when my release of my full projections and rankings for standard and half point and full point PPR were going to be released. And they have. If you go to the website, www.bellyupfantasysports.com, you will be able to go check out the 2020 rankings are officially up there for you guys. Like I said, for standard, for half point, for full point PPR, standard scoring formats. You can go ahead and check that out. And of course, we always love your feedback. And we're going to be talking about those rankings quite a bit on today's show, which is why I didn't have any guests. We may not have any more guests from here on out, quite frankly, because we need to start really diving into the textbook numbers here. We got to dive into those fantasy numbers. We got to dive into what it is that's going to help you win your championships, and that's what we're here for. That's what we're all about. So over the next few weeks, I think we have about 3 more episodes left to wrap up the team profile series, and we will have done all 32 teams and their fantasy outlook. So from that, and then from there, we're going to be doing the top 5, bust 5, sleeper 5 series right after that in August. So that's what's coming up for you guys to go ahead and check out, and we are going to be going over a lot of content between here and then, hoping, one, that the NFL season will be able to kick off and we will be able to have our fantasy drafts when we normally do, and maybe that one aspect of our lives has a chance to be somewhat normal, maybe, just maybe. But with that being the case, we want to make sure you are prepared. We here at MD Nation want you to be able to get the edge on your opponent, to beat your opponents and win that championship game. Now, after the team profile series, we're still not going to do the mailbag today. I know when we said we stopped having guests, we would do it, but I'm going to wait till the team profile series is done because there's still a lot of content we have to get through when we're talking about 4 teams in an episode. And I do want to get these episodes start to be closer to an hour. We'll be going a little hour, 20, hour and a half. Want to get them closer to an hour for you guys for your easier, more convenient consumption. But as soon as the team profile series is over at the end of July here and we move into the top 5, bust 5, sleeper 5, we are going to have a mailbag segment. So what I want you guys to do is that you can check out the MD Nation hotline. You can call in 609-362-2480. This part is important. I didn't think I would have to specify, but we've gotten a few phone calls, but people didn't leave the voice messages. You have to leave your voice message in order to get your opinion or comment or rant played on the show. So just let it ring and then leave your voice messages on that for that phone number. Again, 609-362-2480. If you have a comment, a fantasy question, a rant, it doesn't matter. We will get you on the show for that episode when those mailbag episodes start to happen, which will be at I believe the last week of July will be our first one. So just kind of keep that in mind. You can also contact the show at any time, 24/7 on social media, on Twitter at BellyUpMDFF Show, or on Facebook at BellyUpMDFF Show, or you can email the show directly, mdsfantasyfootball@gmail.com. If you contact me via social media, not only will I get back to you, but there's a pretty good chance that I'll read your question on the show as well. So before we go ahead and dive into our first team that we're going to be talking about, which is going to be the Rams for this one, we do have a few off-season notes that we want to talk about. We're not going to talk about the Mahomes thing yet because we are talking about the Chiefs in this podcast episode as well, along with the Browns and the Vikings. So we're going to get into Mahomes. We're going to get into that. So I'm not going to put that in the off-season notes. Just some of the things that are happening, right now. Raheem Mostert, obviously, his agent comes out and they want to demand a trade. That mostly has to do with him wanting to get paid around $4 million, about the same as Tevin Coleman. We will see what winds up happening. I lean more towards Raheem Mostert will not wind up being traded at the end of the day, but you never know. There are some teams out there who are looking for some veteran running backs. Raheem Mostert does provide some upside. He shows some great promise. He is a little bit older, but you have a guy who can at least, if nothing else, contribute on special teams. He's a fast game breaker. You can utilize him in these ways. So I will be curious to see exactly what winds up happening, but I have to say I would be a bit surprised if he really did wind up being traded out of San Francisco, just especially given what they were able to accomplish with him, especially in the postseason. Now, yes, it's Kyle Shanahan, so it's not that big of a stretch because it is Kyle Shanahan. He is somebody who believes that he can take a running back off the street, and it's his system that makes the running back great, and we know that he has an affinity for Tevin Coleman. We still haven't seen Jerick McKinnon get onto the field. They did restructure his deal so they could keep him on the roster. We know that they're willing to use Jeff Wilson Jr. and Salvon Ahmed, who's a undrafted rookie, and they brought in, has had a lot of headlines about him for a guy who's been an undrafted rookie, and that has to do with the system and Kyle Shanahan as well. So a lot of those things have to be taken into consideration. So it's not a far stretch to think that Raheem Mostert may legitimately wind up being traded. I just lean towards more no at the moment because he's not really. This is a team that's going to be very dependent on the run. Deebo Samuel, we don't know exactly if he's going to be able to be back, and if he's not good at the time, well, all of a sudden they're going to be sitting in a situation. They're going to have to find themselves on the outside. They're going to have to find themselves with going with more ups. So and be able to run, and I just don't see it. I don't see them putting themselves in that situation where Brandon Ayuk is your rookie wide receiver and your only real receiving threat outside of George Kittle. I don't see them going that route. So if they're going to be run first, it's going to have to be, I think they're going to have to look at keeping Raheem Mostert on the roster. That's just where I lean for as of now, but that's what's going on as far as that is concerned. A lot of the other things up in the air are not necessarily fantasy relevant. What does Mahomes' contract mean for Dak Prescott? How the NFL is going to be doing. Right now, the NFL, just a quick tidbit on that, are trying to roll out their plans on having some fans in the stands. It seems like the going rate seems to be about 20,000 fans or so of what teams are trying to prepare for. Now, we still haven't heard the big protocol list that they've come out with, what they're going to be doing to try to be able to protect these organizations so that way we don't have a midseason shutdown, because if you listen to the show so far, that's my number one concern right now. My number one concern is that we get the season started and then we wind up having to have a shutdown in the fall or in the winter whenever the next surge comes. That's what I'm more concerned with, I think, than us starting on time or not at this point. So we'll see what happens there. We still haven't seen what the protocols are going to be and what that means for your fantasy teams. And we're going to get into that a little bit more when we get into August, when we're getting closer to when people are actually going to be drafting, what commissioners are going to have to think about. I'm between that and a mailbag segment, we may wind up dedicating a whole episode to that, or at least a large portion of one, because there's a lot to really consider as a commissioner of a league this season, of what you need to do to try to make it as fair as you possibly can. There's going to be situations this year, inevitably, that are going to throw people off the rails, are going to frustrate people as fantasy owners. That's going to happen, but we're going to go through some things that I think will help commissioners out there really be able to set up the best possible environment for their leagues. And like I said, we might dedicate a whole episode to that one. So we're going to go through that starting in August when we get closer to when people are going to be drafting anyway. That pretty much wraps it up for the off-season notes. Now what we can dive into now, though, is the Rams and their fantasy analysis and what they could possibly be. And with the Rams, hey, there's a lot more to learn than I think people realize here. I think there's a situation where people are kind of looking at the Rams and like, oh, they just kind of expect them to be maybe the same disappointment that they last year. And I don't expect that to be the case. All right, so first of all, you have Sean McVay. He is a offensive mind, but in his situation, hey, are you going to be able to adjust? What did we see at the end of last year? Did we see a situation in which you figured out something with the two tight end sets, being able to run a more compact offense, starting to get a little bit more efficient to turn things around? Are we going to see more of that? Are you going to go back to what you used to do, what has been what you've been looking for this entire time in playing those receivers predominantly. Is that going to be a Josh Reynolds type on the outside there to fill in for the Brandon Cooks role? Or are you going to stick with that? It's going to be a combination of the two. My big thing, and if you've listened to me before, you probably have already heard this, my big thing with Sean McVay is that I believe to at least some extent he is going to look to copy the Kyle Shanahan system. That's what I foresee happening. And that means a lot more two tight end sets, a lot more zone outside running schemes, because Sean McVay's system isn't that different from Kyle Shanahan's to begin with. They both branch off from the godfather of Mike Shanahan and his system as well, but Sean McVay just took his and went in more of a pass first direction with it. With attacking the different levels and the bootlegs and the zone schemes off of that. He just went in a more passing direction, while Kyle Shanahan followed in his father's footsteps and took more of a running perspective on his offense. But they're very similar in the overall scheme and the overall blocking schemes, the areas of the field in which they want to attack. They are similar in those senses. So I think what Sean McVay may be doing this season, taking a little more of a page out of a book from Kyle Shanahan, bringing him in, and looking to make this more of a run, more of a balance. That's what I foresee happening this season there with Sean McVay. So, having said that, that means my expectation is I do plan on seeing tight end sets. I do see them doing more play action-based offense. The other thing I'm going to be looking for is, are they going to motion more? The Rams are really at their best when they motion a lot, get those mismatches, mix it up on the defense at the pre-snap. That's when they're really at their best. They didn't do a lot of that last year. Whether you call it laziness, whether you call it vanilla, whether you call it that he didn't trust the offensive line, which is going to be another factor again this season, whatever you want to chalk it up to, that is what we're looking for out of Sean McVay. That is the concern. Are you going to motion more and get back to the basics there? And are you going to look to make maybe more of a Kyle Shanahan type offense where you're attacking the edges? Now, what does that mean? Well, first of all, talking about our rankings that just came out, Jared Goff, where are you at? This was a guy who was, we're never talking about top 5 fantasy quarterback in Jared Goff, right? Because we know he's just not going to put up that level of production. But we are talking about a guy who last year, a lot of people had inside of their top 12. And this year, not so much, but I don't have him as far off as I think most people would think. And remember, when we talk about these rankings, we're talking about, on the show at least, we're talking about from a half point standpoint, just kind of industry standard thing going on as of late. So Jared Goff right now here with Jimmy Garoppolo. I have him just outside. I have him as QB 17. But he's still going to be a guy who I think you're going to stream in certain situations. And QB 17, by the way, is pretty much in line with his ADP. His ADP is QB 18 right now. That's the ADP consensus that I'm taking that from across all the different type of platforms. With Jared Goff, he's going to do enough to make other people fantasy relevant around him, right? Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods. He's going to be able to run the offense efficiently. I have him. I have him just over 4,400 yards. I have him for about 27 touchdowns. I have him for about almost 12 interceptions. And that's a stat line that I think we can all come to expect out of Jared Goff. It's a solid stat line. It is a guy you're going to be able to stream at some point during the season. The big thing is, can he just be more efficient? It's not going to be about Jared Goff in fantasy football this year. It's going to be about, can you do what you need to do to keep Cooper Kupp at the level that we saw, at least for the beginning half of last year? Can we get Robert Woods back in the end zone at least a little bit more to make him a little bit more fantasy consistent? Or can he have the success that he had the end of last season all the way through as well? Can he do those type of things? Can you get Tyler Higbee involved? What's Gerald Everett extent? That's going to be the key. The big thing about Jared Goff is that he can't feel pressure up the middle. If he feels pressure up the middle, he starts throwing off his back foot. And his arm talent is not good enough for him to be able to go off of his back foot and still be able to get the ball there. That's where he gets into trouble. That's where they start, being inefficient. That's where he starts throwing interceptions. So that's the big key for him. But their offensive line didn't improve. And that is where I get a little bit concerned that this offense could look, unfortunately, more similar to last season than what we would like to see from the previous seasons before, when they were, one of the top offenses in the NFL. That's my concern. that goes back to why I think they're going to run more two tight end sets. So on the flip side of that, if you're going to run more two tight end sets, if you're going to run the ball more in general, now we get into the big question of the Rams. Now we get into what everyone is trying to figure out right now. Where exactly do we put Cam Akers, Malcolm Brown, and where did these guys go? And the answer to that is I don't know if you can trust any of these guys. I don't know if I'm willing to draft them, and high at least. Now, back in even 9th round, we're talking about looking for guys that might have value, might have sleeper potential. Then we'll talk. And that's where I have a lot of these guys ranked. So this is something that I expect to hear back from on social media and from you guys in general. I'm going to drop some draws with this one because a lot of people, while they don't have these guys high, they don't have them this low. My highest ranked running back, in a half-point PPR format for the Rams is Darrell Henderson. I have him as RB38, meaning you want him to be pretty much your fourth running back on your team, maybe even your fifth in a good situation. Darrell Henderson is going to be the guy I think that has the most receiving work of the three. Can Cam Akers catch the ball? Absolutely, he can. And just for reference here, Cam Akers is my 53rd running back overall in half-point PPR leagues. So there's a big gap I have between Henderson and Cam Akers. And that is because of this point when it comes to the receiving game. While Cam Akers is good at catching the ball, is explosive on the edges and out in the open field, he was probably the running back that I gave one of, if not the worst grade to, as far as being able to pass protect. And I harp on this a lot. If you listen to the show at all, I harp on this all the time, especially when it comes to rookie running backs. If you cannot pass protect, you will not get a significant amount of playing time, especially in the passing game. Cam Akers is probably one of the worst as far as his technique, his ability to read. He's a bigger body guy, so once he's able to get those fundamentals in place, I do think he will be fine eventually in his career. I don't know if he'll ever be great. Some guys just don't have the natural inclination to ever be a great pass blocker, but I do believe he has at least the physicality to be adequate to get himself on the field on a more consistent basis down the road in his career. It's why I still like him in Dynasty. I still think Cam Akers is on a path where he's going to be a featured three-down running back at some point in his career. It's just not going to be in his rookie season. They haven't been able to practice at all. He hasn't been able to put that work in. And when they hit training camp, these teams have to hit training camp running, meaning they don't have time to sit back and develop these rookies the way that they normally would in these situations, the way they normally would in most off seasons. They're not going to have that luxury. So they're not going to sit, they're only going to have 23 days, 24 days of training camp before they're going to be able to have to kick off week one. They're not going to waste their time. Of course, they're going to practice with him. Of course, they're going to try it, but they are not going to sit there and take the time that's going to be necessary to get him adequate to let him play more in those situations. It's not going to happen. Darrell Henderson's going to be that guy. Going to sophomore year, and people seem to forget this, they used a lot of draft capital on Darrell Henderson. He went in the, I believe it was I'm drawing a blank right now, but it was the late second, early third. It was somewhere in that range that he went. They thought a lot about him. A lot of people were excited about Henderson last year when they thought Gurley was falling off the wagon. He's going to play, and he's explosive, and he's a good pass catcher. And while I don't think he's the greatest pass protector in the world either, he's better than Cam Akers, and he's been in the system already for a year. A lot of things give him the edge in that. Now, who's going to get the most carries out of Henderson, Malcolm Brown, or Cam Akers? I believe it's going to be Malcolm Brown. Malcolm Brown's my 46th ranked running back in half-point PPR leagues. And I have him for about 134 carries or so, while Darren Henderson gets about 112 and Cam Akers gets about 105. Meaning I have a pretty close three-way split when it comes to these guys. There's no question about that. And I think it is going to be a close three-way split because they're going to want to get Cam Akers involved because Cam Akers is the most talented running back in that backfield. He is in that backfield. No doubt about that. But he's not yet. He's a rookie, and he's a rookie in a season where he hasn't been able to practice, and a lot of things are working against him. And the other reason why there's two things about Malcolm Brown why I have him getting the most carries. One, they love Malcolm Brown. I don't know where people have forgotten this, but remember, they paid him a good amount of money to be a backup to Todd Gurley last year. He was their number two, And he is a bigger type of guy. They're going to use him in the short line situations. They're going to use him in the goal line situations. He's going to get the majority of the rushing touchdowns for this team. And I believe on first and second down to start off those games, that opening kickoff, I believe more times than not we're going to be seeing Malcolm Brown on the field. Now, overall here, Darren Henderson 38th, Malcolm Brown 46, Cam Akers 53. I'm pretty much telling you that all three of these guys are dart throws. So at the end of the day, if you want to take your preference pick on a guy that you feel like has the best opportunity to give you value when you need it, then it's gonna be a preference thing. It's gonna be on you. And I'm fine with you if you want to take Cam Akers over the other two, because we're talking about these guys in a range where you're looking for sleeper opportunities. Anyway, it's either you're looking for guys to fill out your bench so you have some depth when you get into those bye weeks, or you're looking for guys to take shots on. And that's the range that we're in here. So any one of those three, even though from 38 to 53 seems like a long way to go, and it is when you're ranking, because it's the running back position, it's not as big as you think. But I do think Darren Henderson is the guy that I would want to own in half-point PPR leagues overall. If we're talking about standard, I probably lean more towards Malcolm Brown because I do believe he's going to get the majority of the touchdowns. But half-point, I'm leaning towards Darren Henderson. I just don't think Cam Akers is going to play enough. Now, if you're sitting back there and you want to take a big sleeper pick, you want to take a pick that you think has the best chance to win you your league when it matters most in that playoff stretch, then that probably would be Cam Akers, because of the three, he's the one who's most likely to take over the backfield down the stretch. If there's going to be one guy who does that, he would be the guy most likely to do it as a rookie with the talent that he has. But I'm not expecting that to wind up being the case. I think you're going to see a pretty healthy three-way rotation here, and as a result, that kills your fantasy value. And just for frame of reference here, in case you guys were wondering, this is much different than the ADP. Cam Akers is ADP. His ADP is running back 28 right now, which obviously from what I'm telling you, I think that's crazy too high. I'm way lower on Cam Akers. So that puts him in the bust territory for me. They have Darrell Henderson about 41, which is about where I have him at, and 38, and then Malcolm Brown at 65, which I think is drastically too low. Because again, people are not counting the fact that he is going to get the majority of the touchdowns, and he's going to get a lot more carries, people think, especially early on in the season. As the season plays out, like I said, injury, maybe Cam Akers starts to put it together. There's a chance that winds up happening, but at least in the first half of the season minimum, I believe this is a split you're going to see when it comes to this backfield. So it's something to kind of take into consideration. That is what the reality situation really looks like. Now we move on to the wide receivers of the Rams. We got Cooper Kupp. We got Robert Woods. And I'm pretty high on these guys, and I'm pretty in line with the ADP in general on these two. Look, first and foremost, Cooks is gone. And say what you want about Josh Reynolds. He's a nice little play-in, please. Say what you want about whether you think Sean McVay is going to run more 3 receiver sets or 2 tight end sets. That, to me, is really kind of irrelevant either way that you shake it down. It comes down to, for me, that you're vacating those targets for Brandon Cooks. Only a portion of that is going to go to Josh Reynolds, and then the rest of it you're looking at predominantly getting divvied out between Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods. Now, I also want to address this issue. There seems to be some people out there who seem to think that Cooper Kupp, in the second half of the season, when he got a little up, he didn't miss that many games, but when he got a little, he didn't have as great of a second half of the year. A lot of people attribute that to them being a more true in some sense. One, they're looking to run the ball. And 2, no in the slot as much, which is usually where he is. And yes, it contributed to a little bit more, but it had more to do with volume than anything else. If they were to run 2 tight end sets, first of all, there is such a thing as a slot receiver in a 2 tight end set because you can line up 2 receivers on one side. I think we're going to see that quite a bit. Also, Cooper Kupp's still going to be, and Robert Woods are still going to be motioned, still going to be utilized all over the field. It's going to be utilized in jet sweeps, things of that nature. And overall, the offense is more efficient, then the receivers will be fine. And probably the most important point to make, Cooper Kupp is still the number 1 red zone target of Jared Goff no matter what offense they're running. That is his go-to guy, especially in the red zone. And as long as that remains to be the case, I'm fine with it. And Cooper Kupp is a hell of a wide receiver. All right? So this idea that Cooper Kupp's going to fall off this cliff this year, I think is erroneous. Now, it's not everyone saying that. There just seems to be a decent amount where I'm hearing it constantly throughout the industry. It's not everybody, but this idea that Cooper Kupp cannot play on the outside or cannot be productive if they could move to a more 2 tight end set system is ridiculous. This is a highly talented player who is the number 1 target, who has the best chemistry of his quarterback. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. And it's a contract year. I have Cooper Kupp ranked as the 10th receiver overall in half-point PPR leagues, and it's not far off. His ADP is wide receiver 13. So we're not talking about a drastic difference here between me and the consensus on Cooper Kupp. But he is a top 10 receiver for me. The targets are going to be there. I have him for about 117 targets, just getting over 1,000 yards, and most importantly, getting about 7 touchdowns. That's what we're looking for out of Cooper Kupp. He gets that, he's a top 10 wide receiver. That's all it takes. It's going to happen. He is the go-to guy. I expect Robert Woods to take a step up too. Robert Woods is my wide receiver 20. Also not that far off from the ADP consensus. I'm a little bit higher. The ADP consensus on him is wide receiver 26. The targets are going to be there for this team. Plain and simple. The targets will be there for this team, for those 2 players in particular. They're going to look to go to the outside. They're going to look to utilize these guys more. I think the big question will be, how much is the offense on the field, right? Because, look, there's a lot of talent on that defense, but if we go off of what happened last year, I mean, I think we all know that they didn't play up to expectations. Will they this season with the change from Wade Phillips? I tend to lean towards no. Wade Phillips is a great defensive coordinator. I don't think you upgraded by getting rid of Wade Phillips. So I think there's going to be a lot more games where the Rams are having to come back from behind again. They're going to have to throw. Those are the 2 receivers you're going to have to go to. Like I said, Josh Reynolds is a nice little player. Van Jefferson, we'll see what he becomes. But the targets are there. There's a floor there for Cooper Kupp. There's a floor there for Robert Woods that you can sink your teeth into, play, and know that you're going to get decent production every single week. And just to give you an idea, I have Robert Woods going for 108 targets, about just short of 1,000 yards with about 6 touchdowns. And that will be the key for Robert Woods. Does he get that boost in the touchdown mark? Which he should, because it was absolutely ridiculous what we saw out of him a year ago. And I expect that to be the case. I don't think that anything's going to change there. Now, for the tight end situation, this is the other question a lot of people are trying to figure out. Tyler Higbee, Gerald Everett, what do we expect here? And this is the one where I think I might be a little bit different on in some senses. A lot of people have Higbee in the top 10. I do as well. I do not. I have him number 13 overall for the tight ends. I have him that top tight end 2 territory. There's a lot of tight ends I like this year. It makes it a little bit more interesting than most years. It's not just the top 2 guys and then everybody else. There's actually a good amount of tight ends who might have some value this season. But yeah, I have him at tight end 13, but I like his value there. I could easily see him finishing in the top 10. And when it comes to him and Gerald Everett, it's definitely Tyler Higbee for me. It's not even a question. First of all, let's knock out the number 1 notion, which is that Tyler Higbee isn't that athletic. He's pretty athletic. I don't know why people feel like he's just a statue out there or he's just like an okay guy. He's pretty athletic. And he can block. And that's the big key. He's going to be on the field all the time for the Rams because we talked about this. The offensive line did not get better. And because the offensive line did not get better, we expect them to run into more 2 tight end sets. Part of that's going to be Tyler Higbee blocking. Now you can say, well, you have 2 tight end sets. Gerald Everett will be the other guy. Yes. But the easiest way for tight ends to get open, to be mismatches, and we've seen this for years with Rob Gronkowski in New England, why it seemed like nobody could ever come up with a good game plan to actually take him out. Because when you're a tight end and you can block and then run a route off of your block scheme and get open, you can't stick him. You can't play a corner of him on him if he's going to go block. You can't play a free safety on him if he's just going to sit there and block. So you wind up on that linebacker. You wind up on that box strong safety. That's how you get your mismatches. Tyler Higbee will naturally be more open than Gerald Everett. Here's the other thing I keep hearing. The splits between Higbee and Everett when both of them are on the field favor Everett. Yeah, no crap. Duh. Of course they favor Gerald Everett. Why? Because Everett was the lead tight end for the majority of the season in the beginning of the year last year. And they were both healthy. Duh. No kidding. I hate stupid stats like that. Because you're not actually reflecting, you're not actually analyzing the reality of the situation. The reality of the situation is when Gerald Everett went down, Tyler Higbee obviously performed very well, but that's not the reality situation. The reality situation was Gerald Everett came back. He came back, and I'm emphasizing that because for some reason, I don't hear anybody talking about this point, and I don't know why. He came back. He was healthy. He was playing. He didn't miss the entire second half of the season after he got hurt the first time. So, when he came back, it was still Higbee dominating. Not just snaps, but targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns. It wasn't close. It wasn't close. Gerald Everett was usurped last season. End of discussion. There is no, they're going to go back to Everett now as the main pass-catching tight end. No, they're not. He's a nice tight end to split out wide. He's a nice tight end to use as a weapon, as a piece. But Tyler Higbee is the guy now. He is the number one tight end. He is the guy who's going to be targeted more in the red zone. He is that guy. Now, Everett's not going to disappear, and that's why I think putting Tyler Higbee in the top 10 is a little risky because the target share is not necessarily always going to be there for him. And when you really break it down from a reality standpoint, you can't quite put him in the top 10. That's why I have him as I have him as the top tight end too. It won't surprise me if he makes his way into there, because if they are going to be, they are going to play it tight knit. I could say in the packages, they're not going to go as vertical as they were before with Brandon Cooks. Higbee's going to be the guy who's going to probably be the biggest mismatch on the field, just due to what he can do. He's going to be utilized in the red zone, and he might be neck and neck with Cooper Kupp as far as who's getting the most targets there this season with the way they might utilize him. It's Higbee over Everett if you're looking at a Rams tight end. But, as I said, I have 12 other tight ends ahead of him, so I'm probably not going to be drafting Higbee either. And if you want to check that out, make sure, again, you go check out www.bellyupfantasysports.com for all of my rankings and projections heading into the 2020 season. Now, last but not least, we'll mention the defense really, really quickly. Like I said, they have a lot of talent, but I don't like that they got rid of Wade Phillips. I think that was a huge, huge mistake. There was no reason for it. But because they have a lot of talent, I do have them as a top 10 defense. I have them ranked number 9 overall. With defenses, it's so tricky. You know, you don't know exactly what you're going to get. That is a tough division. You have the 49ers, you have the Seattle Seahawks, you have the Arizona Cardinals, who at least should be better on offense. It's a tough division. But I think you should be in situations where when you have Ramsey, you have Aaron Donald, you should be able to get some sacks, you should be able to get some turnovers, especially against certain opponents. And I think they're a defense that's going to be worth at least drafting for now. Other than the New England Patriots, other than the Pittsburgh Steelers, and maybe other than the Baltimore Ravens, I don't know if there's a defense in fantasy football that I feel like I'm going to be drafting and actually keeping all the way through the entire season. So when it comes to defense, that's why you draft them so late, right? Because when you take a draft pick on them, you're probably going to wind up picking up another defense at some point during the season anyway, because streaming defense is the easiest thing in the world to do if you have available ones, because if you get a decent defense, just a decent defense against a crappy opponent, you're going to put up top 10 numbers in the defensive category that week. So unless you have a really elite one, I don't know how much I'm messing with it this season. The Rams would be that where I think they're worth drafting, but they're definitely a defense I'm not going to be keeping for all 16 weeks of the year anyway. And we'll see what we get out of them. But like I said, I do have my concerns with Wade Phillips missing. So I don't know how great they're going to be. That wraps it up for the Rams. I do want to talk to you guys about a sponsor that we have for the show called Podcast App. Now, what they are one of the first podcast apps that are built for you to make reviews, to rate, and to feed back for every one of your episodes for your podcast that you listen to. So for instance, if you go on this show and you listen to it through the Hubble Podcast app, you will be able to leave us a review, rate us right from there on that episode, and give us feedback specific to that episode. So it's really one of the first apps you can do it like that. Make sure you go ahead and check them out. That's HUBL Podcast app on your Google Play Store or Apple Store, wherever you have your software for. Next up that we're talking about is Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are pretty straightforward, actually. Obviously, there's a lot of fantasy value, so that's without a question. And obviously, we'll hit on the first thing, which is Patrick Mahomes, right? And with Patrick Mahomes, he signs that 10-year, $503 million extension. You know, whatever. It's really more of a 5 to 6 year, $140 million contract in its actuality, but It's neither here nor there. The point is Patrick Mahomes is going to be a Kansas City Chief for a very long time, and nobody deserves that contract more. Obviously, being that this is a fantasy football podcast show, his contract has absolutely nothing to do with his fantasy football value. I do have Patrick Mahomes as the number 2 quarterback overall for fantasy purposes. I don't think that should be a real surprise. Look, when it comes to Lamar Jackson, when it comes to Patrick Mahomes, I do think you're talking about a situation that is really more preference than it is anything else. I don't think there's a statistic, I don't think there's an analysis that can really make or break the argument for either one of them to be the number 1 quarterback. So if Patrick Mahomes is your number 1 quarterback, I have no argument with you whatsoever. It's pretty much a preference point. The only argument that I make of why I have Mahomes number 2 and Lamar number 1 is simply this: Lamar's going to run more. It's really what it breaks down to. He proved last year that he can lead the lead in touchdowns, which is what Lamar Jackson did. He had 36 of them. I have him going for about 31. So that puts him right in the range, and he's just going to run more. And that's why I have Lamar ranked just ahead of Patrick Mahomes. But in Mahomes' case, we know sky's the limit as far as the passing ability, right? We know he could throw 50 touchdowns. We know he could go over 5,000 yards. We know all those things are in the realm of possibility. I do have him leading the league in touchdowns, and I believe I have him about second in yards. I have to go all the way through it. He's either first or second in yards there, but I have him for about 4,800 yards passing and about 36 to 37 touchdowns with only about 7 to 8 interceptions. And I think that's a pretty good stat line. Look, they have all the weapons in the world. We know they're going to be a throw-first team. We know what the deal is with Andy Reid. So with Mahomes, it's really just, can he just, not get hurt for a few games like he did last season? And he should be able to reach these numbers. I feel really safe about him reaching these in particular numbers. And it would not shock me at all if he blew all these numbers out of the water. It wouldn't shock me if he got 5,000 yards. It wouldn't shock me if he got over 40 touchdowns. So that's all within the realm of possibility. I think this projection on him is actually a safe projection. The ADP consensus on Patrick Mahomes is QB1. The consensus is to have him step over Lamar Jackson. I just think the rushing ability is too much to overlook. And I even have Lamar not even making 1,000 yards rushing this year. I have him about for 980, and it still puts him just ahead of Patrick Mahomes for me. But we know the sky's the limit. So there's nothing really else we need to say about Mahomes. The question is where... I think the question with Mahomes is more about not where you're taking him, obviously, the quarterback position or what his value is. It's more, where do you take him in the overall drafts? I think that's more what people's questions are going to be this season. Is he a guy who's good enough to make the exception of the general rule of not taking quarterbacks early? And that's going to go for Lamar Jackson, too, for that argument. I have Patrick Mahomes ranked as the number 29th player overall in half-point PPR leagues, which means I have you taking him in the 3rd round, MD Nation. And that's where I have him valued at. Look, I have no problem taking a player where he's valued. I don't care about what position he is playing. Now, there are strategies involved, and I am generally of this strategy that I will wait on quarterback if that's the option to me, generally speaking. I'd rather load up at running back and wide receiver and then take my tight end later and take my quarterback later, because what I'll generally do is I'll take 2 quarterbacks later if I'm looking to draft late on quarterbacks and kind of use those guys to rotate or stream from there. Because you can find value that way. You can find top 10 guys if you wait until the double-digit rounds to take your guy. No doubt. No question about it. But here's the difference. This is why I'm not going to have a problem taking Lamar Jackson in the 2nd or 3rd round. This is why I'm not going to have a problem taking Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd or 4th round in your fantasy drafts. Because they are that much better than everybody else. They're in a tier 1. And then after that, I have Dak Prescott. You want to know the difference that I have between Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and then Dak Prescott as that 2nd tier? There's about a 3 to 4 point per game average difference. For those of you who don't know, that's huge. That is a huge jump from one tier to another, especially in the quarterback situation. But that is a huge jump to have a 3 or 4 point more average projection per game for Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson compared to the next tier, which I have is Dak Prescott. That's a huge gap. That is why they have their value there. That is why you value them so early in the drafts. So I'm okay with it. I am. This year, more than most, and we haven't talked about this too much yet, but this year, more than most, I'm going to be looking to pound running back early. in my drafts and get the receivers late. That's just where the value lines up at. That's where the rankings line up at. That's where the projections line up at. The value is hammer away, get as many running backs as you can in those first 3, maybe even 4 rounds, get the receivers after that. Because even if you don't wind up with your prototypical wide receiver 1, there are so many receivers who are in line and in situations this season to go for those double-digit touchdown years, to go for those 1,000-yard years, that you're going to get value at the wide receiver position later on this year. But while it's kind of an oxymoron situation with the running backs in general this year. It's, on one hand, you have more running backs that are featured this season, but on the other hand, you have less running backs overall to really contemplate wanting to take and fill your team out with. And as a result of that, you wind up having to take these running backs early, because once they're gone, they're gone. And there is a huge cliff between about the 4th round running back and then the next guy, which for me, I don't have ranked again until like the 8th round. Like, there's a huge gap there between those top running backs that are going to be fantasy relevant for you and then everybody else who's really, if not just a shot in the dark, just a hope that they can give you some kind of solid backup value. But enough about that. Back to the Kansas City. I'll give you guys a taste of that, because it comes down to where you want to take these quarterbacks overall. I think Patrick is the 3rd round pick. And I wouldn't question, even if my strategy normally is to wait on quarterback, I will make an exception for him and Lamar Jackson, because they're that much better than the rest of the competition. And sometimes that's all that matters in fantasy football, is just to win that matchup. And that's what you get with those guys. Now, as far as the running back situation for the Kansas City Chiefs, this is where I'm going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to lead off with this. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, his ADP consensus is RB15, and Damian Williams' ADP is RB33. I am flip-flopped as far as who I have ranked in front of who. I have Damian Williams ranked first. Now, it's not because of that news. We had that news break a few days ago about the running back coach coming out and talking about to Damian Williams that they expect him a big breakout year. They expect to be hugely involved. It's not based on that. It's not based on that. It's based on what I already knew, which is Damian Williams is still going to be the starter week 1. I have him as the RB26 overall. I have Clyde Edwards-Helaire as the RB35 overall. So I'm still talking about guys I think you should draft, and Damian Williams, I have him just outside that RB2 territory, but I'm still talking about RB3s. I'm still talking about possible flex plays. And yes, this is another situation similar to the Rams, where if I have to pick one to be my league winner of the season, or who has the most likely path to be the guy at some point during the year, it would be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And that's where he has that value. But that's not going to happen early on in the season. And we don't know exactly when it'll happen, if it'll happen. There's things that would have to go his way. Number 1, Damian Williams have to get hurt. Not that that's too much far of a stretch, but that would still have to happen, I believe, for him to actually have the opportunity to take over the job. Andy Reid, even though he spent a 1st-round pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Andy Reid is not going to open up the gates and say, Edwards-Helaire is our featured guy, 3-down back. It's not going to be the case. Again, back to pass protection, right? Edwards-Helaire, not a very good pass blocker. Now, he, unlike Cam Akers, he knows where he's supposed to be, but he has 2 things working against him. 1, he's very small. So even if he's at the right place at the right time, it could account for nothing still when a linebacker's bearing down on him. But 2, he still needs to work on his technique. He still needs to work on his ability to cut block, his ability to anticipate, and just be able to get enough in the way against those bigger type of guys to maybe nudge them in a different direction to give that quarterback that extra second. He's not there yet. You just spent this contract on Patrick Mahomes. What do you think their number one priority is going to be? Protecting Patrick Mahomes. If they don't have the biggest confidence in the world in the rookie running back to be able to do that in those 3rd and long situations, to at least give him that extra second, yeah, Damian Williams is going to play. Damian Williams' best part of his game. Look, last year, I was the guy on the ship saying, do not draft Damian Williams because he's going to be a huge bust for where he was going. Now his value where he is now, I'm fine with his value now because now it's in line with what he actually is. He's not a great runner in between the tackles. Edwards-Helaire is better than him at that. But Damian Williams is a hell of a receiving back. We all know that. That's Clyde Edwards-Helaire's best attribute as well. A guy who is a rookie who hasn't had time to practice. They know what they're getting out of Damian Williams. I think it's one of the reasons why that news break came out. Kind of remind everybody, hey, Damian's here. We expect him to contribute. He's going to be involved in a significant way. Oh, and by the way, with the both of them, given their skill sets, being that they're smaller guys, I'm not going to be surprised one iota if we're going to introduce a third running back into this mix. If it's going to be Darren Williams handling the goal line situation work, where it's neither one of these guys in the goal lines all the time. Now, the one caveat I'll give to that is that the Chiefs are in a special category where they'll go shotgun at the goal line, which opens up the door for Edwards-Helaire and Damian Williams to both be involved in those areas. But I wouldn't be surprised if they decide they want to pound it. They're going to go with a third guy. There's a lot of things to take into consideration. The reality of the situation here, there is not a clear-cut path to what the workload is going to be for Clyde Edwards-Helaire in his rookie season. Do I love him for the long term? Yes. If I have to pick one guy who might win me my league in the playoff stretch, it's going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But as far as overall value goes, as far as playing time goes, as far as volume goes, especially from the get-go, Damian Williams is going to be on the field more. I'm telling you that right now. It's the veteran guy who's going to be out there at least to start the season. Now, if he stinks, which I think he does stink running in between the tackles, if he gets injured, all of a sudden all bets are off. We open up doors for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But things have to happen. And when you're going through projections, when you're going through rankings in these preseason, you have to take situations as they are right now, in their reality form right now, in order to give the most accurate, reasonable expectation that you possibly can. And that's what this is all about. And as it stands right now, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not the starter. So stop treating him like he is. As I drop things again on my studio. Got to tape stuff down here. But that's besides the point. Look, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, having him be the ADP 15 running back overall, putting him in the middle of the pack of the RB2s is a huge mistake. It can't happen. It can't happen. He's not going to be good enough. He's not going to be playing that much. He's not going to get that kind of volume to be drafting him that high. If you're putting him as an RB2, you're saying you have to take him in the third round. I'm telling you right now, he's going to bust if that happens. He's not going to give you third round value back for the entire season. Now, if he hits right, if he hits during the playoffs, then maybe all is forgiven because maybe he hit the opportune time that you needed him to in order to win your league. If that happens, fine. I get it. You may find that being the return value, but I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a long beginning of this season until that point, until that happens. There's too much that has to happen for that to happen. If you're wasting a third round pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I'm telling you right now, your team's going to suffer, especially early on in the season. And I haven't been able to say this too much, but one of my favorite sayings is, to you, MD Nation, let someone else in your drafts make that mistake. Let someone else make that mistake. Damian Williams is going to play more. Given all the situations with everything going on this year, given the pass protection woes of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I cannot stress that point enough. Next up, we got the wide receivers. Not too much to talk about here. I mean, look, Tyreek Hill, his ADP is wide receiver 3. That's about where I have him as well, especially when you're talking about half-point PPR leagues. I have him at wide receiver 4, just behind Devontae Adams. We know what he can do. We know he's going to be a top 5 guy. The only question is going to be, can he play 16 games? If he plays 16 games, we know he's going to be competing for a top 3 wide receiver. Plain and simple. Not really much else to say there. The only other argument that we really need to have is Mecole Hardman and Sammy Watkins. Now, Mecole Hardman right now, his ADP consensus is wide receiver 47, while Sammy Watkins is 49. This is a mistake. Now, we're not talking about a draft pick here where is going to be one of your core pieces of your team, whether you're talking about Hardman or whether you're talking about Watkins. You're going with who you think has the most potential at that point. So it does have a preference point in that sense, but Sammy Watkins is still the starting wide receiver opposite Tyreek Hill. He's still the number 2 guy. The guy who consistently got 6 to 8 per game, along with Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill last season when all 3 of them are on the field. Mecole Hardman, while he had a couple of games where he had some big explosive plays where he caught some bombs and took off, because he has that fast ability, and we know Patrick Mahomes is so good that as long as he can actually get the ball to his wide receivers in those situations who are fast like that, they can do something with it. But Mecole Hardman was barely targeted. And he's not going to be more targeted than Sammy Watkins if both of them are on the field. That's not going to happen. So the idea to have Hardman ranked ahead of Sammy Watkins is dumb. Just from a sheer volume standpoint, just from where they stand on the team. Watkins didn't leave the team. He didn't go down the pecking order in the depth chart. Mecole Hardman did not usurp him last season. Nothing would indicate that. other than that's what people want to have happen because they're so sour on Sammy Watkins this season last year and because they caught a few highlights of Mecole Hardman taking it to the house a couple of times last year. And that was enough for them to want to try to rank Mecole Hardman ahead. It's not going to happen. I have Sammy Watkins as the 46th receiver. Again, we're talking about a wide receiver 5. We're talking about a guy that you're taking a flyer on who maybe in Watkins' situation, you're talking about more of a guy who you're hoping will be able to give you some value in some bye weeks and be able to put it together. But remember, Watkins had a great postseason. Everyone talks about Damian Williams and trying to make sure to remember him on the team because of what he did in the postseason. Sammy Watkins had a very good postseason. Sammy Watkins had a very good Super Bowl. One of the few receivers who had a very good Super Bowl in that game, by the way. So, yeah, he's going to be over Mecole Hardman. He's going to outproduce Mecole Hardman this year, barring injury. So I don't know why he's ranked ahead on that note. But either way, you're taking a guy sleeper. And then Travis Kelce, I don't think we have to talk about him too much. ADP's 1. I have him ranked as a tight end 1. Just the offense, the Mahomes quarterback situation. He just has a much higher floor than, say, a George Kittle in an offense that's run first. And that's, I have George Kittle number 2, and that seems to be pretty much the consensus all the way around for those two guys. So he just has a higher floor when it comes to the type of offense that he's in, and we know he can produce like a wide receiver 1. And I have him going for 1,200 yards this season. I have him going for 8 touchdowns this season. So he's going to be in wide receiver 1 territory as far as his numbers go as a tight end. We know that. I have him, I have him as a guy you want to take in the second round probably if you're playing in tight end leagues. If tight end premium, you might even want to take him in the first round. As far as their defense goes, I actually have them ranked pretty high. So this is always the thing with the Kansas City Chiefs. They're never a good NFL defense, but they're always a pretty good fantasy defense. Because while they're going to give up points, and we all know that, they still get a lot of sacks and a lot of turnovers because they're in situations where their offense is up by 2 scores, so they kind of get to play that fantasy-type defensive football where you can kind of go after the stats like that, which actually count for something. I have the Chiefs ranked as number 3 defense overall for fantasy football purposes. Now, I would never rank them as the top 5 in the NFL, but because they get those sacks, because they get those turnovers, they're in the top 3. They're a defense you're going to be able to pick up and get some pretty good fantasy production out of. So kind of one of my surprises there as well. Now, before we move on, we do have the Browns on the other side. But first, I want to talk to you guys about one of our sponsors called Prop Me. And they are the new innovative gaming platform and really the first of its kind. Prop Me makes betting from person to person more easy than ever. Designed for new and experienced gamblers alike, using straightforward prop bets that can literally be created on anything. You want to bet on what the next play will be, then create a prop. You want to bet on who's going to win that game of beer pong between your friends, then create a prop. It takes hanging out with your friends to a whole new level. So join today by downloading the Prop Me app or go to propmellc.com. Now, next up, we got the Cleveland Browns, and this is where we have a lot of different scenarios in which we have to talk about, and this is also where I'm quite different than most of the ADP out there. I'm going to be very interested to see in what you guys have to say about that. So, first of all, talking about the Browns, of course, you have to talk about Baker Mayfield, Kevin Stefanski, all the changes that are happening there. The fact that now we have Baker Mayfield, who might be who's actually playing for job this season in some odds. I think it's one more year. This is the first year in the head coach. I think as long as he does okay, he's not absolutely terrible, I think he'll get one more season to prove that he can be the franchise guy. But some people think this could be his make or break year. And you know what? I don't think it's totally outlandish to think that. This is a system that is really good for the Browns. I don't know if it's a system that's good for Baker Mayfield as far as his production goes and his fantasy production. We're going to get to that in a second. But I think this is a perfect system for the Browns as a team for their offense to become more efficient again, more effective again, and get themselves back inside the top 10, which means that should set up for Baker Mayfield, at least from an NFL standpoint, to look decent enough. Now, from a fantasy standpoint, his ADP is 14, and I have him ranked much lower than that. I have him as QB 25. Not because I think he's going to be terrible, but because the volume is not going to be there. This is going to be a run-first team. You have Nick Chubb, you have Kareem Hunt, you have Ken Stefanski. We know he did with Minnesota last year. We know he's bringing over that Gary Kubiak type of system. They're not going to throw the ball for 600 times. It's just not going to happen. In fact, I believe I have them. Yeah, I have them for about 503 attempts on the year. about that 500 range. And that would be 40 more attempts than what they did with Minnesota and Kirk Cousins last year, because that was only around 466 attempts. So that's with 40 extra attempts still only getting to about 500. There's just not enough volume there, I believe, for Baker Mayfield to be great. And here's the thing about Baker Mayfield. He has that gunslinger mentality, which gets him into trouble, which has him thrown into double coverage. If that were to significantly improve, we could see him jump up because the negative points around Baker Mayfield will not be nearly as harsh. And that's a big thing what drops him down, because I have him for about 15 interceptions off a 26 touchdown ratio. That's about what his ratio has been so far in his career. That's about what we can expect. And that's what knocks him down pretty low in my book, as a guy that maybe you look at some point being a streaming option depending upon how he's playing, but we're not talking about a guy that we're going to be bothered drafting in redraft leagues. I don't even have him quite making 4,000 yards. The volume's not going to be there. This is going to be a run-first team. So to that effect, what we really need to talk about with this team is Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, Kevin Stefanski, how all this is going to work. Now, David Njoku did talk about wanting, he's demanding a trade right now, right? This is another trade demand situation that I don't see happening. The Browns really do want to have two tight end sets. Kevin Stefanski just coming off a year where he had Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith Jr. Now, while neither one of them had great statistical years, being able to play those two tight end sets, being able to utilize those guys really helped the offense do what they needed, what they wanted to do. That's why I think they're going to keep David Njoku at the end of the day. I think they have to in order to do that. That's why they brought in Austin Hooper and paid him all that money. They wanted to have those two athletic tight ends that they can use in the blocking game and also use in the pass game and base their offense off of that. So I don't think David Njoku is going to go anywhere. And unlike most teams with the Cleveland Browns, this offense actually improved. And that's probably the most surprising part about it. Not many offensive lines that need to improve actually improved. The Browns did. They got better. So everything's in line. The system's there. The talent's there. They have the running backs to do it. So what to expect out of these guys? And yet I find myself being much lower on Nick Chubb than most. And I'm going to get into why that is in a second. So Nick Chubb's ADP consensus right now is about RB8, right? I have him at RB15. So I'm still telling he's still valuable. I have him for rushing for about 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. I don't have him being involved in the passing game. And they've talked about this. Kareem Hunt's been sitting in on receiver meetings. Their game plan is to get him involved in the passing game one way or another. Will there be times that they're both on the field? Sure. But I always love that excuse, like, oh, well, they're both going to be on the field at that time, so they both can get work if they're both on the field. There's still only one football, number one. So even if they're both on the field, only one of them can get the ball. And that's only one, it's only 1/5 of an option because you still have the other receivers and the tight ends who could also get the ball. So only one football. Number two, the amount of times that teams who do use two running backs in the backfield, the amount of times they run that formation is really not that significant. So I don't know why that's something that gets brought up, like, oh, they're going to use both of them back there, and that's somehow supposed to boost their value for both of them. Like, yeah, maybe 5% of the time. Who cares? That doesn't do anything for me in fantasy value. Why doesn't it give me the boost for both of them that they can both be on the field? I just don't care. It's not significant enough. It's one of those faulty narratives out there designed to boost certain people's arguments, but in reality has actually no bearing on the production that you can actually expect. Chubb has not been a guy who's been heavily involved in the passing game since he's been in the league. Now, yes, this is a new coaching regime, but they brought back Kareem Hunt. They didn't have to. He had the off-the-field issue back in the wintertime. They could have cut him loose. They could have traded him away. They didn't do any of that. They brought him back. I don't think they brought back Kareem Hunt just to be a backup running back. And I talk about this all the time. People are like, oh, well, Dalvin Cook went crazy, so Nick Chubb's going to be an RB1. I would agree with you if Kareem Hunt wasn't there. Look, Alexander Mattison, he was drafted to be a backup. He was drafted to be a guy who could do a little bit of everything to back up Dalvin Cook in case of injury and to give him breathers. Kareem Hunt's not just a mere backup. Kareem Hunt was a superstar in this league, and he didn't fall off. He didn't fall off because he lost talent. He fell out of favor because of off-the-field issues. He is arguably, if he was in a similar situation to Nick Chubb, would be looked at as just as much of a superstar, just as much of a guy who could be putting up that kind of production this year in this system. He's going to be the guy, I believe, who catches the ball in the backfield most of the time. I have Nick Chubb getting most of those carries. I have him getting the goal line stuff. But Kareem Hunt's going to be significantly involved. I have these guys on about a 60-40 split. And I don't think that's unreasonable. As a result of that, I'm much higher on Kareem Hunt than most. I'm trying to find it now. I have Kareem Hunt ranked as the RB 23. His consensus as of right now, I just had it in front of me. His consensus is RB 29. So it's not significantly different there, but I am higher on him. But if you're going to be that high on Kareem Hunt and what his production level is going to be, I don't think you can then make the same argument in the same breath that Nick Chubb's going to be a top 10 running back. You can't do it. There's one football. There's only so much both of these guys can do. And if Hunt's going to be involved on the majority of third downs, he's also going to get his portion of carries. And even if you want to make it a 65-35 split as far as the carries go, that's fine. Nick Chubb still doesn't wind up cracking the top 10 for me. It's volume-based. Is he awesome? Yes. Does the system fit what he does to a T? Yes. If Kareem Hunt wasn't there, I would be the guy making the argument that Nick Chubb should be in the top 4, along with the Barkleys, the Elliott's, the Kamaras, and the McCaffreys of the world. That's how high I would put him if Hunt wasn't there. But Hunt being there takes away a significant mark, and he's going to be involved. He's not going to go away. So you can't have it both ways. You can't have Kareem Hunt being involved and being a valuable flex piece while also having Nick Chubb in the top 10. It can't work that way. The volume doesn't work out that way. So that's something else I want you guys to be able to take into consideration when you're looking at these things. Now, for the wide receivers, that's another big question we got to talk about the Cleveland Browns. We have OBJ. What is he going to be? Can he bounce back? Can he get back to a top 10? What is Jarvis Landry going to do? Look, here's one thing I like about this system. It's not really built around 3 receivers. It's built around featuring your top 2 guys. It's built around OBJ and built around Jarvis Landry. And they fit what they want to do pretty well. I mean, just look at Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. You have 2 guys, a similar situation. You have 2 guys who have the ability to rotate inside and out. You have one guy's a little bit better at the outside, one guy's a little bit better at the inside. They're going to rotate them just like that. The big thing will be, can OBJ stay healthy? We haven't seen OBJ stay healthy in a long time. And while he played 16 games last year, there's no doubt in my mind that a big reason why he wasn't as productive is because he just didn't look like the same explosive OBJ that we're used to. Yes, they had problems actually getting him the football. He had problems getting open, and that had a lot to do with that groin injury. And it explains a lot in my mind, because when you're watching tape, he doesn't look like he's the same player. Let alone, put aside the offense, put aside the poor play of Baker Mayfield, put aside all that. He just didn't look like the same player. So I buy that he was significantly banged up throughout the year, even though he actually played all 16 games. I've been recently doing this. I'm going back on Game Pass. I'm trying to watch the season all over again. Go back and watch Week 1 of the Cleveland Browns last year. Look at what OBJ was doing on the field. He had a pretty good game Week 1. Look at what he was doing on the field. Look at how he was running. Look how he's getting open. And then look at OBJ again and watch the Cleveland Browns in Week 6. Pretty much from Week 6 on. Tell me it's 2 different players. Tell me you don't see a significant difference in what he's able to do on the field from a physical standpoint. OBJ, I do believe, is going to be a top 10 wide receiver again this year. I have him as wide receiver number 8 overall. His consensus at the moment is wide receiver 12. So not too different, but I do have him inside that top 10. I do have him as a wide receiver 1. I have him getting 124 targets. I have him getting over 1,100 yards. I have him getting 7 touchdowns. And that's what's also great about this offense. Baker Mayfield doesn't have to do a lot for Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham to still get enough volume to where they're really productive fantasy wide receivers, because all the volume is going to go to them. Like I said, even last year, take a look at the tight end situation. Kyle Rudolph, Irv Smith, overall, weren't involved all that much. They really weren't. All these people are excited about Austin Hooper and what he's going to mean. It's like, oh, they utilize their tight end so well. They utilized them. It wasn't for a lot of production. On Jarvis Landry, I have him at wide receiver 23. Consensus about wide receiver 31. So I'm much higher on Jarvis Landry. I'm higher on the wide receivers of the Cleveland Browns. Landry, we know what to expect out of Landry. I don't think we have to go into too much detail. We know he's a high floor type of player. We know he's not going to get a lot of touchdowns. We know he's not going to get a lot of games where he has over 100 yards. But I have him for about 6 touchdowns on the year. I have him getting 112 targets. He gets those few things going his way. Half-point PPR, full-point PPR, he's going to be one of the most steady guys from week-to-week basis, and we know that. And I don't think anything else needs to be said. And the offense plays well to that. It's a West Coast system. West Coast fits these two guys to a T with the amount of route running ability that they have and what they can do with the ball after the fact. They'll be fine. I expect a big bounce back year for OBJ. Now, the tight end situation is a little bit trickier. Now, obviously, in David Njoku, he was never a guy that we were really going to be talking about from a fantasy standpoint as far as having, value. He wasn't somebody we're going to look to draft. He wasn't somebody who's going to be on a sleeper because it's really hard in a team that even when they utilize two tight ends for that second tight end to be that fantasy relevant. And we don't have him being that way. So the question becomes about Austin Hooper. And I wound up having Austin Hooper ranked about 7th overall for half-point PPR and for my tight ends. Just because he's going to be utilized in the red zone. Baker Mayfield does look for his tight ends in the red zone. So while, like I said, I talked about Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith not really being as involved, the big difference there is that Kirk Cousins doesn't look for his tight ends in the red zone, at least not since Jordan Reed and back in Washington days. That was it. Baker does look for his tight ends in the end zone. Even with Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, even with having a terrible year last year, he would still look to heavily utilize the tight ends in the red zone situation and give them a lot of targets there. So that's why I wound up having Hooper as my 7th tight end overall, having about 622 yards. I don't have him for a lot of yards, but I have him for about 7 touchdowns. And if you get that, you're going to be able to get into the top 10 situation. His consensus is tight end 10, so I'm a little bit higher on him. But that just kind of states the fact that I'm a little bit higher on the pass catchers in general when it comes to the Cleveland Browns, because this offense is going to be efficient, and it has clear points on who's going to be doing what roles and who it favors and what it looks to do in certain situations, and it lays it out perfectly. This is an offense that we can really sink our teeth into from a fantasy perspective to know what we're going to get. Like I said, the only question for me is just how significantly involved is Kareem Hunt going to be, because that's what's going to dictate what happens between him and Nick Chubb. But that's the only question mark that I'm really going to have. And like I said, Kareem Hunt, I expect him to be involved. Now, before we get into our last team that we're going to talk about on the show, which is the Minnesota Vikings, I got to talk to you guys about one of our favorite sponsors of the show, and that's Trophy Smack. And these guys are phenomenal. These guys are, I think, why people should be getting fantasy football leagues, because their trophies are amazing. Commemorate your league in the best possible way. There's no other company in the business that does it better than Trophy Smack. They create trophies of all sizes, belts, and rings with a variety of colors, along with free engraving and free shipping. And now you can get a free ring with your purchase of a trophy or belt if you use the promo code BELLYUP. So click on our Trophy Smack link on Twitter, on Facebook, or go to TrophySmack.com and use the promo code BELLYUP on your order today. Now, last but not least, of course, we have the Minnesota Vikings. And I thought this was good to do the Browns and the Vikings in the same show. They go hand in hand with kind of what we're talking about, the scheme-wise. Now, first of all, yes, Stefanski gone. Kubiak takes over the offensive coordinator. Easy answer to that question is obviously the offensive system's not going to change one iota. And I think we all know that going in. So what does that mean? Well, we know that Dalvin Cook is awesome, right? I have Dalvin Cook ranked number 5. It's pretty much not just in half point. I think I have him ranked number 5 in every scoring format. And the only reason he's number 5 and not maybe number 4 or top 3 necessarily is just because there's still an injury question when it comes to Dalvin Cook. There's still are you going to play 16 games? And I don't. I have projected for 14 games this year. Because I'm looking at it this way. You had 2 seasons in a row where you had major soft tissue damage and you wound up missing a slew of games. Last year was your healthiest year, and you still wound up missing about 2 to 3 games because of shoulder issues, because of ankle issues. It wasn't a soft tissue issue, which is a good sign that maybe things can improve moving forward, but he still got banged up. And he's still a smaller type of guy to get a huge workload like that. Now, I'm not saying I expect Alexander Mattison to be more involved than what he was last season. I don't. But what I am saying is that I still expect that it will be very difficult for Dalvin Cook to play full 16 games. And to that effect, while I have him ranked as number 5, you do have to ask the question to yourself when you're drafting, especially in the first round, what is it I'm looking for? Am I looking for the guy that I think is just simply going to do the best or is going to score the most when he's playing? And that's who I want my first round pick to be. Or do I want it to be a safe guy? Do I want it to be a guy that I feel confident in will be there for me week in and week out and be able to get through the season healthy while being able to produce at a high level? Do I want to have that guy who has that high floor? That's a question you have to ask yourself if you're in that top 5 area and you're looking at Dalvin Cook in the face. Because the fact of the matter is, even for me, while I have Dalvin Cook ranked ahead of guys like Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon, I have to say his floor is lower than those guys. I have more confidence in Henry playing 16 games. Barring a holdout, I have more confidence in Joe Mixon playing 16 games than I do for Dalvin Cook. So it's a question you have to ask yourself. But here's the thing. When Dalvin Cook was on the field last year, he was number 2 to Christian McCaffrey all season long. The way he's involved in the passing game, the way that system runs, how good he is, I think knocking him from being the number 2 running back to number 5 is our way of assessing the risk. And like I said, I still have him projected for 14 games. He did prove to me last year that he can get past the soft tissue stuff. The rest of the stuff is kind of, wear and tear damage. But if he can avoid getting soft tissue injuries, then I think overall he'll at least play the majority of the season. So that's where I'm okay with him. As far as productivity goes, I don't think we need to get into it. We know this guy's going to be crazily involved. I have him for about 75 targets on the year. I have him running for about 284 attempts. And off of that, we're talking about a guy who should easily be able to combine for nearly 1,700, 1,800 total yards and about, I'm trying to see it here, about 10 touchdowns, 10 rushing touchdowns, 2 receiving, about 12 total touchdowns. I think those are numbers that are easily achievable for Dalvin Cook if he's able to play at least 14 games this season. If he plays 16, then we're talking about him right in the line with the Saquons, with Ezekiel Elliott's, with the Alvin Kamara's this year, without a doubt. But we know that with Dalvin Cook. It's just assessing the situation. He's one of the few guys, if you're going to take him in the first round, I think you do have to make the conscious decision that you're going to take Alexander Mattison around earlier than what his ADP is when he's expected to go. And I'm trying to find it here. I have Alexander Mattison ranked as my 47th running back overall. Obviously being a backup, but he's a valuable handcuff that you have to go after. And if you're in a draft where maybe somebody likes Alexander Mattison or likes to take people's handcuffs, because that's a strategy I've seen out there too, other people taking people's handcuffs as a just in case once they get into their bench territory, you have to take that in consideration. Know what your league is at all times. But his ADP is RB44, so right around that territory, puts him around that 10th, 11th round. Maybe you want to make it a conscious decision that if you have Dalvin Cook, to draft Alexander Mattison no later than the 9th round, just to make sure that you have him, just to make sure that you're locked in, that you're good to go. And because we saw last year, Mattison filling in when he got the opportunity, he's able to produce in that system pretty well as well. So you want to make sure you have him if you're going to draft Dalvin Cook. It's the one strategy tip that I would give you if you go that route. I know he's quarterback. I know he skipped over Kirk Cousins, but that's because it's pretty irrelevant. I have him as QB 21. I think it's pretty reasonable. He doesn't have a high ceiling, and that's with him getting about 500 attempts this year, which would be like about 40 more attempts. He's just not in a situation where he has a ceiling. He's not. We know that they're a run-first team, number one. They don't have Stephon Diggs anymore. And while I love Justin Jefferson, and we're going to talk about him in a minute too, still not on the same level as Stephon Diggs leaving. And that Stephon Diggs also their big target down the field, the big stretch guy. I love Jefferson, but he's not on the same level as Diggs as far as stretching the field goes. This team's going to be a lot about the intermediate to short range part of the field. There's just not a ceiling there for Kirk Cousins. Against certain opponents, is he a guy who's okay to pick up and stream because you think you might be able to get 16 points out of him in a given week? Yeah, he'll be in those situations. But I think there's a lot of other options, a lot of better options that have much higher ceilings and more ranges, more different outcomes in their range possible for them. We know what Cousins is going to be in the system. We know they're pretty much going to make sure he doesn't have to put himself in a situation where he has to win the games or has to put too much on his shoulders, because we've seen what happens, especially since he's joined Minnesota, what happens if Kirk Cousins puts too much on his shoulders. His offense just doesn't work the same. It's not what it's built around. So there's not really too much else to say there. Now, here's where it gets shocking for the Minnesota Vikings. Here's where there's another instance where I expect to hear a lot of backlash from a lot of people, and I'm going to explain to you why. Adam Thielen. A lot of people love him, right? Stephon Diggs is gone. His replacement's a rookie wide receiver. He's going to get all the targets, all the share, all this, all that. And actually, before I give my ranking, his ADP consensus ranking is wide receiver 11, which means if you're 12-man leagues, he's a wide receiver 1. No. This is another guy, MD Nation. I am telling you right here, right now, let someone else make that mistake. If somebody wants to take Adam Thielen in that second or third round, let him. Let him. There is absolutely no reason on the planet Earth why you should be trying to make a point to get Adam Thielen over somebody else. This is a guy that has to be drafted based on value, not on hype. First of all, Justin Jefferson is better than most people think. Second of all, Adam Thielen, without Stephon Diggs, without playing the slot as much as he did, because Jefferson's a very good slot receiver. We're going to get into that in a second too. I think he is going to be forced to play the outside a little bit more here and there. He's not as good. This is a run-first team. He's not explosive. He's not a guy who's going to take the ball in his hands on a slant for 5 yards and have the ability to take it to the house like an OBJ. Which is why I think OBJ, is in a better situation because he has the athletic ability to play within the system, but then also add something on it. Adam Thielen doesn't have that. He doesn't do that. That's not his game. I have Adam Thielen ranked as the 28th wide receiver overall, meaning I have him outside the top 3 receivers. I have him as a wide receiver 3. I have him as a flex guy. And the volume will be there. He's going to be a great flex guy. He's going to be a consistent flex guy. But when you break it all down for Adam Thielen, this is not a guy who typically gets 100 targets. I have him for about 90. This is not a guy who goes for over 1,000 yards except for once in his career. I have him at 953. I have him for about 6 touchdowns. There's just not a lot of volume in this offense, and Justin Jefferson is going to be more involved than people realize, and that brings me to my second point. So first of all, before we get into his numbers of what we expect, it's not everybody out there, but I've been having these conversations on social media that seem to suggest that they believe Justin Jefferson is a perimeter wide receiver only. And to that, I have to say to them, and if you're one of them, you clearly have never watched Jefferson play football. You didn't watch the national championship. You didn't watch LSU games last year because that's the only explanation. This guy lined up in the slot the majority of the time. He's a great route-running wide receiver. In fact, I was very high on Justin Jefferson this entire draft process because I knew he could line up on the outside and the inside, because I knew he could run routes really well, because he has very good hands. My only question for Justin Jefferson going into the draft process was I wasn't sure how explosive he was. I wasn't sure how fast he was. And then he shows up and runs a great 40 time. And once he did that, then all of a sudden, all my issues with Justin Jefferson dissipated because that was the only question that I had. How explosive are you really? And this is a guy who showed you that he has the speed, he has the explosion to be able to stretch the field on top of being one of the more polished wide receivers, which is why he wound up being, to me, the third best rookie wide receiver right behind Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb. Not Henry Ruggs, not T. Higgins, not anybody else. Justin Jefferson. And I don't think he's that far off from those guys, by the way, either, once you add in the explosiveness factor that he proved to all of us. He's not far off. This is a guy who's going to be heavily involved. Now, having said that, I'm not going crazy here. He's wide receiver 41 for me, while his consensus is wide receiver 54. So I'm much higher than the consensus. I'm not talking about a guy. I'm not saying Justin Jefferson's going to be a wide receiver 2. I'm not saying he's usurping Adam Thielen. That's not what I'm saying at all. But he's going to be involved enough. I have him getting 80 targets. I have him getting 55 receptions, 850 yards, and about 6 touchdowns. When you combine that with the run-first mentality of this team, there's just a limit to the ceiling for these wide receivers, and especially in Adam Thielen, because he doesn't have that big breakaway ability, playmaking ability, if you will, where he has to get fed that volume, and I don't think he's going to get enough volume to be a top 2 a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 1. We're talking about him as a wide receiver 3. That's going to be the reality of the situation. He wasn't great last year. Oh, and by the way, he wasn't great last year even when he was healthy and on the field, because a lot of people got banged up. Even when he was healthy, even before that, even early on in the year, he wasn't very good last year. And not that he wasn't very good, but he wasn't getting the production. And it wasn't like Stephon Diggs was getting so much production. That's why Adam Thielen wasn't getting fed the ball. That wasn't the case either. Stephon Diggs only did well when Adam Thielen wasn't playing. That's when he had his best fantasy weeks. Neither one of them really had great fantasy production last year. Why would that change this season without Stephon Diggs? He's not going to see that much more targets than he did the year ago. It doesn't make any sense when you actually examine the reality of the situation. Tight ends, we've actually talked about them a little bit. They're not fantasy relevant as far as redraft leagues go. I still like Irv Smith a lot in dynasty leagues because of his ability. Eventually, I do expect him to take that job. I have him as tight end 31 though, and Rudolph, I have somewhere in that territory as well. I'm not Rudolph. I have his tight end 27. They're not guys that I'm looking at. Look, they both only went for about 300 yards apiece last year, only a few touchdowns. They both play so much that they kind of eat into each. And like I said, Kirk Cousins doesn't target the tight end enough in the red zone. So I don't see it as being fantasy relevant for you. Now, Minnesota's defense, on the other hand, they got better. And we'll still see what happens to Everson Griffin. He hasn't signed anywhere. I still wouldn't be surprised if he actually wound up coming back to Minnesota to begin with. But we know it's a very good defense. And since this team's been able to run the ball last year, the defense has been able to play much better. It's a top 10 defense. I have them ranked number 7 overall. They're definitely a defense that you could draft and have some good value through all year long. So it's definitely a defense I think you should take note of, and definitely a defense worth drafting in your leagues too. That wraps up the show. I know it's a lot of information. We do 4 teams, and you really want to break down each position. It's a lot to get to, even when we're not necessarily doing interviews. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. Remember, the big thing, though, is that we have those rankings out. Check out www.bellyupfantasysports.com today to check out the rest of those projections and rankings that we have up there for you guys. We will be back next week with the team profile series, another one for you. We're not doing any more guests. We're going to be back. We're talking about fantasy numbers, fantasy expectations for these players. Make sure you hit me up on social media at BellyUpMDFF Show on both Twitter and Facebook. And of course, you can always call the MD Nation hotline to leave your comment, rant, or question, 609-362-2480. Make sure you actually leave the voicemail message so I know what your question is and don't just call. So everybody have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you guys again really, really soon.